My name is Matthew Walter. Such a pleasure to be with each of you this morning. For those of you that may be watching this recording, thank you for taking that time as well. I'm the Director of Business Development at Acacia, and I've got the absolute privilege of leading both our new business side of the business, as well as working with our incredible team of workplace wellbeing consultants who partner with a lot of the organizations that we'll be looking at the data of today. Now, before we do jump in, I do want to make an acknowledgement of country. We do want to pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of the land. For me personally, I'm based in far north Sydney on the land of the Kurungay people. I'm in a small town called Cowan, which does mean in the local Kurungay language, surrounded by water, which is what I am. I'm not sure where each of you are meeting from today, but wherever we are, I'm sure we will join together to pay that respect to all elders, both past as well as those that are present. Now, the artwork that you may see on your screen is artwork that we got commissioned for our Reconciliation Action Plan. I really wanted to tell the story of that today because I think in this Acacia Way webinar episode, more so than many others, it really is about individuals coming together. Those little shapes that you see up the top that look like upward arrows symbolize people meeting, people sitting, ready to connect. The tree is us as Acacia. When we speak about Acacia, we speak about the perfect tree and the ability that the Acacia tree has within an ecosystem that it is planted in order to provide nutrients for the surrounding soil, right through to the top of the tree, where we may see that birds are roosting on that. That's what we aim to be. And as we have our conversation today, what I really hope comes through is that that brand promise that we have of every connection matters was absolutely existent in FY26, and it's not going anywhere for FY27. So in relation to what we hope to speak through today, if you'll indulge me, I'm really hoping to go through at a high level initially what we've seen from an FY26 perspective in overall mental health and wellbeing trends and insights. From there are three industries or three collection of industries I'd like to do more of a deep dive in. Blue collar insights, speaking about mining, construction, logistics, and manufacturing. Pink collar, from a healthcare and human services perspective, so think non-for-profits, think hospitals, etc. And then white collar insights, specifically focusing in and around finance and insurance, professional services, as well as some of those legal firms that we support. Now, rest assured, we will not be giving any information away that breaches any level of de-identification or anonymity, but really speaking at a trend level, what things look like. From there, I'd like to explore a couple of lessons that we've learned at Acacia, as well as a couple that have been learnt from the organizations that we support. And I'm hoping that we can leave today with the initial seeds of practical strategies. Now, before you jump off the call, because hey, my industry isn't represented here, I'd really like to put it to you that regardless of whether you're very similar to one of the industries that we're speaking about or diametrically opposed, there is absolutely going to be insight here for you, what you can take to your team and the impact that you can have on your people. So please bear with us, and I'm confident, and you can hold me to this, that there'll be a piece of value that's taken away. Most importantly, I've seen down here, let's make this a conversation. I'd really like for this not to be just Matt speaking to the incredible people that have joined us this morning, but having a little bit of a conversation in relation to, oh, that's an interesting insight. I see this within my organization. Well, how did you actually go about delivering this or providing that? For that reason, there are two ways in which you can interact with me. You can use your chat functionality and you'll see that. Now that is typically publicly visible. You can click in and make that private, but if you're keen to ask a question and potentially have that with a relative level of anonymity, which is absolutely okay, please use that Q&A function and I will ensure that I don't use names when I answer those Q&As. So please feel free to use that chat. You can give me a hello in the chat just to make sure that it's working if you'd be willing to, but really excited to jump into this. And again, not just Matt speaking to you or at you, but a collective conversation that we can have. So before that, you've seen some things squiggle around on your screen at the moment. The reason this is really important is I think setting the scene as to where our data is being collected from is paramount to this conversation. We're not just speaking here about things like, oh, what have we heard through the grapevine? Or what have we seen within one particular organization? Our dynamic dashboards, which are hosted by Power BI, really enable us to take the organizations that we support, people's data, and translate them into stories. Those stories can become so meaningful when we start pulling together those trends and insights that they can also influence, really importantly, the actions that are then taken. What you'll see now on the screen is the way in which we can then map those to the psychosocial hazards, the cascading of those hazards, and working with our partner organizations to really get an understanding as to what interventions make the most sense for which particular cohorts of people. And that's something that we will absolutely be diving into this morning. Now, if you're a current customer of ours, I'd really encourage you, if this is something that you haven't seen too much of, reach out to your dedicated workplace wellbeing consultant now or immediately after this presentation. Say, hey, I really enjoyed that. And this is exciting, but it's so much more exciting when we're just focusing on our organization and our particular divisions. So please, I encourage you to do that. If you're not partnered with Acacia, that's okay as well. This is still going to be so insightful for you. But I'd encourage you to be speaking to your EAP provider. Have that chat with them in relation to, hey, what data can you show us that's really going to help inform the strategies that we're putting into play? If that's something that can't be delivered, without being too cheeky, I'm so open to connecting with you. Let's have a conversation in relation to what a partnership with Acacia might look like. So let's get on with why we're all here. I wanted to start today's conversation with a really high level view as to what have we been seeing throughout financial year 26. I know all of you will know what that means, but when we talk about FY26, we're saying from the 1st of July of calendar year 25 through to just recently the end of June of calendar year 26. Can be really helpful to do year-on-year comparison so we can understand what has changed. That's exactly what we're doing in this instance. Um, I hope we all recognize that long gone are the days where individuals have personal issues. They leave those at home, come in, punch in at the clock in the workplace, and off we go. I'll pick those issues up when I go back to the home. That isn't the case, right? We all appreciate that work, home, we're one person, and that integrated life balance is something that's just a real thing. That being said, we as leaders in organization certainly have much more ability to be able to create real practicable strategies that are going to be able to influence particularly work concerns. So what are some of the work concerns that we saw? Starting on the far left-hand side, really excited to see that we've got an increase of above 2% points of individuals reaching out for mental health general well-being. Now, when we speak to general wellbeing, we're speaking about a proactive service that Acacia offers. This isn't necessarily someone reaching out suggesting, hey, I've got this imminent issue, I'm in distress. Whilst, of course, we're always there for those individuals. It's typically an individual that's reached out to say, hey, I'm doing okay at the moment. Perhaps I'm even thriving on that mental health continuum, but I know that I've got some things coming up. What I'd like to be able to do is sit with a clinician in order to map out a plan so that I can be my best self, so that I can continue growing and building a level of resilience. So if and when these tough times appears, I've got some tangible strategies in order to enact. Exciting to see year on year on year that the people that we work with are communicating, hey, reaching out to EAP isn't because you are of mental ill health. It's because you want to get better and stronger because a mind is just like a muscle in that sense. We've seen mental health anxiety actually reduce slightly, which is positive to see as well. Still one of the primary presenting concerns, and we know that we live in a world where it's rife with anxiety, but it's positive to see that on a downward trend. Now, unfortunately, and a main theme throughout today's presentation will be the fact that work conflict with managers is on the rise. That's something that we're increasing. It's only representing 1% point at this point in time. But if it's a trend and it's a trend that's growing, it speaks to the need for more thought around how are we empowering not just our employees, but also our leaders in an organization to ensure that they're really given the tools and strategies to be able to manage their individuals. As we'll get into, the general theme seems to be that leaders are expected to do more with less. On top of that, we know that the legislation surrounding psychosocial hazards isn't something that's going away. I hope you agree. I, for one, think that's a positive thing. But in being a positive thing, we need to be equipping our leaders. We can't just expect them to know what they don't know. Finally, from an excessive stress perspective, which is the fourth highest workplace presenting concern that we're seeing, we do see that that's relatively on par. Positive, it hasn't grown, but it would be wonderful if together we could see that reduce when we start doing analysis FY27 versus FY26. Now, you saw on that little video that I played for you that we do map our presenting concerns to psychosocial hazards. And I wanted to speak to some of those top contributors. So we can see mapped underneath each of these three, we have the psychosocial hazard of poor workplace relationships, we've got the psychosocial hazard of job demand, and we've got the psychosocial hazard of traumatic events and material. Probably isn't a surprise based on that previous slide that work conflict with manager is absolutely the highest contributing presenting concern into what is our highest psychosocial hazard, poor workplace relationships throughout all of the organizations that we support. From there, we're seeing that work role and excessive workload specifically, which feeds into job demands as a psychosocial hazard, is also on the rise. I'm not sure where each of your organizations are, but we do know that FY26 was one of potentially belt tightening. Unfortunately, needing to make some difficult decisions in relation to what does our organization look like set up for success moving forward. As a result of that, potentially we have declined in terms of our overall employee headcount, and that's absolutely going to have a flow-on effect in terms of excessive workload, and we have seen that materialize. From a positive perspective, we have seen a reduction in trauma and incident. So specifically traumatic events and material in terms of the psychosocial hazard that maps into. Now that's exciting to see, and I am confident within the organizations that we support that controls are being in place in order to reduce and minimize as much as possible exposure to those traumatic events and material. What must be said though, is we arguably have more responsibility in relation to poor workplace relationships and job demands versus some of those uncontrollables. We often say at Acacia, a critical incident response is something that we will always ensure that we are there for within 2 hours in metro areas, 24 within more of those regional and rural areas. But it's also one of the services we wish we never had to deploy. Sadly, we do, but ensuring that you've got the right response in place and mapped out is essential so that if and when traumatic events and materials are on the rise, you've got the right partnerships in place, and not just from a partner perspective, but also internally, you have it mapped out as to what makes sense and who do I need to reach out to when something happens. The final thing I wanted to mention from an overarching perspective is what we're seeing from a tenure perspective. We've been collecting this data for many years, which is really helpful when we start doing a year-on-year analysis. And for the first time in quite some time, we're noticing that employees, individuals within the organizations that we support with a tenure of 3 to 5 years has become the number one cohort of individuals that's reaching out. And that's really interesting. You can see back in FY25, it was those newer employees, probably speaking to the fact that there's a level of onboarding that's happening. When I'm inducted into an organization, a big part of that induction should be, we care about you, we care about your mental health. As a result of that, we really want to explore some of the support mechanisms available to you, one of which is the employee assistance program. Let's speak to what that is. Now, 3 to 5 years, if we were to hypothesize why is that the case? What that speaks to me is two things. A gradual maturation of an employee workforce. We can't be 0 to 12 months forever. If we're able to retain our employees, it's likely that they are going to be in a position of 3 to 5 years, within a couple of years' time. That logic follows. What it also demonstrates is those that have been in the role potentially for a little bit longer may have a little more weight on their shoulders now, particularly given some of those instances that we've seen with an increase in workload. So something to be really mindful of. It's quite easy to capture a new employee as they enter the business, but what are we doing to ensure we're still communicating to those individuals that have been in the organization for a little longer? They're potentially pretty self-reliant in terms of their autonomous working behaviors, but are we ensuring they understand that there are avenues to reach out for support when things do get difficult or when we want to reach out proactively? What our data would speak to is many of our customers are doing that really well. So congratulations to them. So I now want to do a little bit of a deep dive into what we see within our blue collar. As a reminder, here we're speaking about manufacturing, mining, construction specifically. When we consider blue collar, although not always the case, oftentimes we're considering externally working employees. Perhaps we have some influences like DIDO, drive in and drive out to site, or FIFO, fly in or fly out to site. Often, again, not always, it may be a shift that we're looking at. We may have a morning shift, an afternoon shift, and a night shift. And being able to capture each of those demographics is super important to ensure that no one's left behind. Let's have a look into what our data would tell us about the blue collar organizations and hopefully some trends that are relevant to many of you that we see here today. So the first thing I want to speak to, and this is an interesting one in relation to, has an individual used EAP before? To be really clear, this statistic isn't asking, have you used Acacia before? It's asking, have you ever reached out to an employee assistance program before? Overwhelmingly, 73.05% of individuals have suggested no. I haven't used it before. Now, this is anecdotally, and I can't say that this is a guaranteed statistic, but from our understanding, what this likely means is the first time we're tapping into EAP is also the first time we're likely tapping into any level of formal clinical intervention. What a privilege it is to be one of the program owners in these organizations, and we've got so many incredible blue collar companies we work with that are introducing individuals to mental health support for the first time. How exciting is that? Now, that doesn't mean that it's 100%. We still have just shy of 30% of individuals that have used an EAP before, recognize its importance, and have suggested, yep, I want to use that again. So let's bank that and go into the next. What's really, really exciting for me to see is that we've had close to a 100% increase by percent point. So close to a 5%, well, over a 5%, sorry, it's over 100%, close to a 6% point increase in relation to how individuals are learning of tapping into EAP as a result of a colleague directly telling them to. So let me break that down as to what it means. FY25, 5% of individuals that reached out to us did so as a result of a colleague suggesting to them that this may be something that's helpful to them. Throughout FY26, we saw that double. That is significant. It's significant for a host of reasons, but when we talk about blue collar, when we talk about mental health literacy, oftentimes trauma that we see, stigma that we see in relation to what's happening in the organization is absolutely acute. Predominantly male dominated. And what that speaks to is we're building trust. We're destigmatizing mental health, and we're destigmatizing it to the extent not only are we likely saying, hey, I've reached out to EAP myself, we're also being empowered to say, I can tell you're not doing okay. Maybe this is something you should try. Really exciting statistic and speaks to all of the hard work that's been done. I can see that there are a couple of questions coming through. I will absolutely jump into those once we get to the end of blue collar. Please keep asking them. I'm not ignoring you. The source of issue is also quite interesting. When we compare this to all organizations, oftentimes we see closer to a 50-50 split. 50% of the reason I'm reaching out to Acacia is due to personal issues. 50% of the reason I'm reaching out to Acacia is due to things that are happening physically in the workplace. This is definitely skewed when we consider blue collar. And we can see here that representative of that 70%, so by far the majority of people reaching out within blue collar are doing so because of their their personal issues, things that are happening at home. Again, if we go back to some of the criteria in relation to blue collar, potentially I'm out on site away from my loved ones for 2 weeks straight. That's difficult. It's also difficult when I then get home as a father of a young child myself. I can't imagine the exhaustion after working 2 straight weeks, so then needing to be at home, and now I'm dad mode. From my own personal perspective, I can't just sleep in. I need to now ensure that I'm present in the family. That's not easy to do, and it can create conflict. And the conflict we often see is the conflict with partners. What's encouraging is that individuals are feeling empowered, not just to reach out for work issues, but actually a significant volume of them are reaching out due to those personal issues, which is interesting to be able to note. And it does start to tell us a story. So what does this story tell us? A few pieces of context that I want to speak to. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to Elle Lancaster, who is the predominant workplace wellbeing consultant for all of our blue collar partners. As you can see, at Acacia, our approach is physically being out on site with organizations. It's not a matter of resting on our laurels and sending a few emails, because we understand that the people that we're looking to get into support like to see you in person. They like to hear from you in person. It demystifies and again destigmatizes the service when they can actually see a representative of Acacia physically on site. Maybe a barbecue as we see in this photo, but it may also be in completely high vis and PPE out at the Pilbara on a mine site. We are there to support those organizations and meeting people where they're at. Another way in which we do that is actually by embedding clinicians physically on site. Doesn't just need to be regional and remote mine sites, although that can be very helpful. And the service that we use in order to deliver that is called EAP at Work. Who's the right clinician? What's the right time frame? And let's make sure that there are clinicians regularly on site so that it becomes just a normal part of being on site. Yeah, that's where Matt sits, or that's where Elle sits. They're the clinicians. Again, neither Elle or I are clinicians, but I'm just using that as an example in terms of the normalizing of speaking to mental health and well-being, the reduction of stigma that can create, and the early intervention that it absolutely promotes. When we talk about that collegiate referral, it's also a lot easier to suggest, hey, have you tried reaching out? You don't necessarily need to pick up the phone. The clinician's just there on this part of the site. Why don't you go and speak to them right now? And clearly we're seeing that individuals are empowered to do that, which is really, really exciting to see. I'm going to jump into that Q&A now, just so I can make sure I'm not leaving anyone. Yes. Will we get a copy of the slides? You can absolutely get a copy of the slides. At the end of this, we'll have a couple of QRs. I was hoping it was a blue collar question, still a valuable question. We can absolutely share these with you. We'll just ask that you go through the form and say, hey, can I just get the slides, please? And we can circulate those. We just don't want to spam everyone's inbox with the slides if they don't want them. Good question. Thank you. And again, people, please use that chat functionality in Q&A as well. From here, I want to leverage to arguably a very, very different industry, pink collar, healthcare and human services, the hospitals that we support, the charities that we support that are out there looking after the vulnerable people in their communities. When we think about some of the hazards that may be there, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, what are these individuals going through? So first and foremost, what I'd really like to focus on is what we've seen already in the high level figures, that conflict and poor workplace relationships is absolutely on the rise within this particular industry subsector. We can see in FY25, we had 15.83, and that's pretty dramatically increased. Now, there's clearly been some level of breakdown in workplace civility within a number of organizations, and the understanding as to why is helpful, where is helpful, but so what? And what we'll conclude this little piece with is the so what in relation to what can we be doing to really support not just our people, but also our leaders. Moving on, and this is a bit of an interesting statistic to read, is that although we're seeing a breakdown in workplace relationships and do know that close to 60% of those are conflict with manager, leaders are actually still the number one, by far, having grown 5% points, the number one referrer for individuals into support. This tells us one of two stories. It tells us either it's only a couple of leaders that are isolated in terms of those that are creating a level of conflict or being part of a level of conflict. What it may also speak to, though, is 27% were referred to by their leader. What about the others? Were there people left behind because the relationship wasn't intact, either for the leader to be able to say, hi, team member, I really encourage you to reach out for support. I've done it myself. Here's what it looks like. Are they reluctant to say that? Or is the employee reluctant to hear it because they're in conflict with that particular individual? Really important to highlight. As a result of that, we've actually also seen the HR and the health and safety function in terms of that referral pathway reduce, where it was at close to 30%, it's now dropped to 23%. So a little bit of an adjustment there, and really points to the importance that our leaders are equipped and able to have that conversation. Shifting concerns. What I wanted to speak to here is that the work conflict with manager, as I alluded to earlier, has absolutely become the number one presenting concern. That wasn't always the case. FY25, we actually saw that work health, trauma, and incident was the number one concern that we were seeing, which now represents the fourth highest. So there's certainly been a shift, and that shift speaks to managers and their people and how are they being supported. Anecdotally, we know, if I take a nurse, for example, we've heard time and time again that many nurses in leadership positions are in leadership positions due to tenure and expertise. Now, I'm sure many of you may understand that this isn't just the case in healthcare and human services. Think about your own organization. How many leaders do you have in place due to their tenure and their expertise? Now, that may be a very good reason to reward performance, but have we ensured that they've got the right soft skills in place? Do they understand how to take their people on a journey, how to have the right conversations, how to be that supportive but also very clear leader that says what's appropriate and what's not and nips things in the bud before it gets to a point of turning into conflict? Now, on top of that, we're also seeing that excessive workload is on an increase pretty significantly. And what we oftentimes see is when there's work conflict with a manager, whilst it isn't an even correlation, it typically does result in a correlation with work conflicts with co-workers as well. When we see that I'm not getting on with my manager, what's that doing to the culture of the team? And then what's that doing in relation to individuals speaking to one another? Really important to note. It's not all doom and gloom. Again, I can see that the Q&As and the chats are blowing up, so I will speak to that in just a second. But what do we suggest? And what have we been doing with a number of our organizations that are seeing data very similar to this? From our perspective, the root cause oftentimes is that leadership capability. And that isn't the fault of the leaders. We don't know what we don't know, but what we absolutely can and do is really focus on ensuring that we're giving them the right training. And so our workshops and training division as part of Acacia's Wellbeing Solutions is every day speaking to cohorts of employees and arguably in this instance, most importantly, leaders with services like mental health for leaders, psychosocial hazards for leaders. These can be as short as 1 hour and as long as 2-day workshops and really designed and customized for the particular organization that we're supporting. It helps organizations navigate psychosocial hazards. It enables leaders to understand the part that they play. It's not all on them. They don't need to carry everything, but how do we improve, for instance, the conversation to refer into some of the organizational support processes that are in place, like EAP? We typically get between 90 and 100% of individuals that have gone through these courses, because it's feedback that we collect, suggesting that the content was really helpful, it was relevant to their day-to-day, and they're really excited about being able to impart a lot of these skills that have been taught into their everyday work. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I'm not suggesting that this is a fixed coverall and that suddenly you do one leader training session and everything's going to be perfect. Absolutely not. But it's a way in which we can start and demonstrate both to the leaders and the employees. We see this issue, we care about it, and we're doing what we can in order to break down some of the walls that may have unfortunately been put up. I'll turn my head now, so forgive me for that. I'm going to read some of the questions. Just a comment, not a question with the graphs. Ideally, you'd have more than 2 years. This is true. To better understand the trending trajectory, maybe something for next year. Thank you. A really good point. We have done 3 years, year on year in the past. Similarly speaking, we've done a 5-year review before. What I'd encourage you to do is, if that's something you'd like to see, at the end of this, I will be offering for anybody that would like to a deep dive into your specific industry, and we can actually absolutely go back year on year on year on year to see what has changed. The reason that we're focusing year on year in this instance is we know that FY26 has had a number of interesting happenings, let's call them, that have had really acute and very visible changes. But you're right, seeing year on year, I can absolutely give us a more in-depth view, and that's something that we can explore. Thank you for the question. Oh, and I've already answered that question, so that's all good. So we're now rolling into The final industry that I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive for everybody on, which is that white collar. Again, finance and insurance, that includes the likes of the banks and insurers that we support, superannuation firms, etc., professional services, so accounting firms and similar to that, as well as a couple of other industries that we pull in there. But really, when we consider these, we're talking about predominantly office-bound individuals that are predominantly sat in front of a computer. One would expect that there's going to be very different insights that are drawn from him. Let's have a look. Starting off with the top workplace presenting concern shifts. Again, only year on year, I'm afraid, but I still think it's really valuable. We can see that in compared to overall, so this is across all organizations, we can see that manager conflict is the number one presenting concern that we're seeing from a workplace perspective across the board. But compare that to our white collar, probably not too surprising. It's work role, specifically excessive workload that's been focused on, and the reason that people are reaching out for support. Work conflict with manager then feeds in. And then interestingly, what we're seeing is a lot of fear around redundancy in particular. I'm either approaching redundancy or I'm going through redundancy at the moment. Now, I am all too conscious of how many organizations that we support, but also broader to the Australian and global market. There are a lot of changes that are being made to organizations. It is not nice for anybody, but it probably correlates as well in relation to redundancy creating excessive workload, which we're seeing. I used to have 5 people in my team, now I have 2. Are there support mechanisms in place, or am I just being expected to do more with less? And that is going to lead, as it has, to work conflict with manager. The final one that we're seeing, and this should be a worry for any organization that sees that, is a lack of satisfaction in my role. What does this speak to? It speaks to higher job mobility. If I'm not feeling satisfied, if I'm not feeling safe at work, if I'm not feeling excited and energized, and when we talk about other key metrics that many of you will look at, like absenteeism and presenteeism, it's likely that we're going to see absenteeism go up and how present are individuals within the organization. Tells a really interesting story, and particularly compared to year on year. It's interesting to be able to map out what's happening across all organizations versus what we're seeing specifically within white collar. No 2 organizations are the same. No 2 industries are the same. But what we can absolutely get a view of is how do we support this particular industry? But then what are we doing specifically with the organizations within that we're partnered with? Another note that we're seeing is the digital sophistication, which may not come as a surprise to too many people. Again, here we're looking at just FY26, but we're looking at all of the organizations we support and then white collar. White collar specifically, quite interestingly, are much happier and are requesting to have the sessions that they have with their clinicians via video. Their phone's slightly less and their face-to-face is slightly less. Again, we can hypothesize as to why this might be, but arguably many people working in these particular industries do have a laptop, maybe a laptop I can take home. It may also be a laptop I can pick up and pop into a small room and have my session during the working day. Perhaps that's why. Perhaps, though, when we speak about the work burden that appears to be on them as a result of those that are reaching out to suggest that that's the case, I don't actually have capacity to leave the office or to leave home because I'm working 16-hour days at the moment. And so the likelihood of being able to see a clinician face to face is lowered. Interesting to see. This is something that we are really passionate about at Acacia, which is empowering choice. We do not mandate, oh, you must do this via phone or you must do this by video. And from our perspective, we would love that any individual, 20 minutes from their place of work or their home, can, if they would like to, jump in the car and physically see a clinician face to face. I speak to that because this is speaking to these individuals' choice. It isn't speaking about the availability of clinicians to them. So the final thing that I wanted to map out, particularly within this context, is getting an understanding of EAP at work again. Oh, well, Matt, you spoke about that in blue collar. Made a lot of sense in blue collar, talking about regional sites. Potentially, it's a FIFO environment. Why are we speaking to this in relation to white collar? Good question, if I do say so myself. The reason we're speaking to it is because of the huge impact that we've seen that it has had. One service that we offer is not specifically designed just for one industry, and we can see it paralleled here really nicely. The data that we're looking at here is really speaking to, from an EAP counselling perspective within our white collar, we're happy to see that early help seeking behavior, so individuals reaching out with an issue when they've had it for 3 months or less, is the number one. So 32% of all people from this particular industry subset are reaching out within 3 months. That's great to see. What's less good to see is that 30% of those individuals are waiting over 12 months. So they're holding on to this issue for an extended period of time before they're finally putting their hand up and saying, hey, I need help. That's through the general EAP counselling. Now, when we consider EAP at work, when we've got clinicians physically embedded in offices or particular branches, what's the impact of that? Well, what we see is a really nice shape emerging in relation to up to 3 increasing by 6% points. But then we're seeing that 3 to 6 months is the second highest. The third highest being 6 to 12 months, and the least volume of people reaching out in terms of how long they've held on for their issue for is over 12 months. And when we look at that as a percent point, you're talking close to it. Well, it is 11.11% difference, right, in terms of over 12 months. So that's a huge reduction in individuals reaching out for the length of issues. They still exist, and we'd still would love to see these numbers go down, but it's really positive that we're seeing what we're seeing in relation to that. And the reason for that is because, again, mental health support's visible. The clinician's there. I know every Tuesday and Thursday I can either make an appointment, perhaps it's a walk the floor model, and I'll be bumping into them and be encouraged to go and have a chat with them. Really, really powerful and very, very helpful, and something that I'm really pleased to see. Now, in terms of other ways in which we can help, something that we are finding very, very helpful, particularly in relation to that burnout side of things, is professional supervision, a service where we can take particular cohorts and roles. Let's take call center environments, for instance. We understand the pressures that are on those individuals and oftentimes the irate or occupational violence and aggression that they're receiving on the other end of the phone. Being able to meet in a formal way with a clinician as a group to share their experiences as a way in which they can feel heard, they can understand they're not alone, but also collectively put strategies in place together. We've got EAP at work, but also supervision, which is super powerful. Again, at this juncture, I'm going to go to a couple of other questions that we're seeing. Someone has asked, can we access our own organization's dashboard live? The answer to that is yes. Now, yes, through 2 ways. Given the privacy concerns that are relating to dashboards, we do need to see a specific level of utilization or a specific headcount within an organization, typically 1,000 employees or higher, to be able to give you your own personal username and password to be able to jump in and have a look at that. But that doesn't mean if you have less than that, you're being left behind. My strong encouragement would be is if you don't have the utilization or headcount, reach out to that dedicated workplace wellbeing consultant that you're partnered with, and they'd love to be able to go through this to see what are we actually seeing within your individual, within your divisions, what are those trends, what are those insights, and what are we going to do about this in terms of some proactive implementations to nip some of these things in the bud. Really good question. And we are coming into land, I promise. But I did make a couple of promises at the start of this presentation. I wasn't just going to leave you with doom and gloom. I was going to speak to where to from here. FY25 versus FY26, and then FY26 specifically across different areas that we've deep dived into, demonstrates a real need to empower and enable leaders. Now, you can do that through Acacia, and we've got our manager support hotline ensuring that leaders know they can pick up the phone and speak to a senior psychologist at any time within 10 minutes, super important. We've spoken about the workshops and training as well that Acacia can deliver on your behalf. But it's not just something that Acacia has a silver bullet for. It's things that I would love for you to be thinking about in your organizations. What can we be doing to support, but not just support, enable our leaders? Enable them to be the leaders that we need them to be, to really be supportive of our people and hopefully see some of that work conflict come down. Something else we've not spoken a lot to, but when we reflect on that blue collar, what we saw was the propensity and huge increase in peer-led referrals, the comfortability in and around that. It may be that FY27, if you don't already have something in place, is a time to consider Could a peer support program more formally be something that we'd like to do? Can that work in conjunction with how we're enabling our leaders? Now, if that is the case, please reach out to us. We absolutely can help across the whole spectrum of peer support, from initial candidate selection, from the training that's involved in being a peer supporter, and we do also have a dedicated peer support hotline. So that's something that we're really excited to be rolling out among a number of organizations. It isn't something that you can put your hand up today and say, I want it, and it's going to be delivered tomorrow. There's some work that's involved there. That work's really important to ensure that we've got the right people on the front lines being those peer supporters and seeing an even larger increase in individuals being referred to EAP by colleagues, or if you have peer supporters, we can set it up in the system. I was referred by a peer supporter. The final thing I want to speak to is the establishment of trust. Our data speaks to that. It speaks to the fact that individuals at a high level are utilizing EAP more than they had. So from a high level, I know we didn't see that in blue collar, but across the board, we saw that more individuals have used EAP. And we're also seeing that their length of service is 3 to 5 years. What that speaks to is the collective role that we've been playing with the organizations that we partner with. I'm sure you've been doing in your organizations of destigmatizing mental health, ensuring that something like an EAP isn't just hidden up on the internet. It's something that we're really speaking to with passion, but it isn't a standalone or a fix-all service. It's plugging into a number of other wellbeing solutions that both Acacia can support, but can also work with other organizations that you may be partnered with to ensure that the normalization of mental health is important. That's my takeaway and my goal for FY27. It's not something that we're going to cover overnight. The statistics in relation to 1 in 5 in the workforce dealing with a level of mental health concern, that hasn't gone away. That means when we look at EAP reports, we should probably be seeing 20% utilization against every single organization. We're not there yet, but it's something that we can continue working toward collectively to ensure that our people feel comfortable reaching out. That's my challenge to you, and hopefully I've given you a couple of areas to think about. Regardless of whether you're from these 3 industries or others, I absolutely think it will be equally as applicable. So what's next? We do have a range of other activities such as this, be it our Acacia Way webinar. We're doing our roadshow at the moment where in each city we're having breakfast where you can actually hear from our customers. They're going to be speaking in relation to some of their experiences. If you're a customer with us today and you would like to be able to share some things that you've been doing, again, please reach out to your workplace wellbeing consultant because we'd love to hear from you. In order to keep on track of that, you can jump into here, eap.acaciaconnection.com. What this website will enable you to do is 2 things. Number 1, just sign up to our new business or business development newsletter. If you're an existing customer, you can still sign up. Just means you hear about some of these events that we'll be doing. Secondly, what I'd encourage you to do is fill out that contact us form. I promise you, it doesn't mean that we need to assume that we're going into some level of partnership, but if there are specific questions that you've heard, we'd be happy to answer that. So that's just about time, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you again for those that have stuck through. I hope you're excited as I am in terms of what FY27 might look like. And I really hope that our paths cross so that we can do things collectively together for the betterment, the mental health and wellbeing of your people.